Good evening. My name is Jamone Moore, and I get the incredible opportunity to attempt to recap an incredible event that I was a part of this past weekend entitled Black Men of Enrichment. It was a collection of African American men from all over the country sharing their stories of hope, of pain, of tears, building, doing some networking, and as the event was appropriately titled, Being Enriched. And I say attempt to recap because there is no way in a couple of minutes I have that I'll be able to recap the 3+ hours of just powerful information that was shared and exchanged between everybody that day. We had 6 panelists that volunteered their time, that spoke with vulnerability, spoke their truth, that shared the events that shape their lens through which they see things, and their take on what's going on in our community today. So it was a wonderful time. Definitely was one of those things where you just had to be there, right? So I'll attempt to recap this now. I wrote some notes down, so I'm going to be looking off the screen because, like any good listener, you got to take copious notes, and so I tried to do that. The first person on our 6-person panel that we got to hear from was Officer Joe Hammond. And Joe Hammond is a 20-year veteran of the New Jersey State Police. And he started off his introduction, his little bio about himself, by mentioning that at the age of 5, his dad left the home. And that really struck me. It caught my attention. It got me engaged immediately because I could relate to that. I can relate to having a home without a father in it, as can many other African American men. And I know that the epidemic of fatherlessness is not limited to our community. It just seems more prevalent in our community. And so him sharing that really, again, got me engaged immediately because I could relate to it. And the first question the moderator asked him after the moderator shared that his son had mentioned to him, when asked what he wants to be when he grows up about being a police officer, the moderator asked Officer Hammond, what do you say to a teen about why they should be a police officer? And he started off, talking about it really depends on their environment and what they have seen when they look to the left and to the right. That's what he said. He talked about, peer pressure, and that the negative interactions that these African American men are dealing with are real. And for me, that struck home because I know the community I grew up in, if I went through it, then my boys went through it. And the same thing, if they went through something, I adopted that same experience. And so definitely some peer pressure involved in that. And he ended off his answer by mentioning that there aren't enough young black men taking the test. And he talked about if you want better policing in the community, you need to have people from the community, joining the force. And it made sense. It's pretty simple. And I think about where I grew up at. Nobody I knew joined the police force. So that really hit home too. He talked about the need for officers to be in the community. He talked about that. A lot of the good officers get painted with the broad brush of the negative of the officers who aren't doing the right thing. But there are a lot of them involved in the community that there needs to be more community involvement. He talked about, in addressing the young men not taking the test, is recruiting them while they're young, doing a better jobs in the schools. And I also hit home for me because I know in the high school I went to, that was predominantly African American and Hispanic. The Army, the Navy, and the Marines were up at my school a lot. They knew that there were young African American men up there, who didn't have fathers in the home, who didn't have a lot of structure. And the military provides that, provides structure, a brotherhood, an opportunity for stability, and things that, young African American males, would definitely find attractive, who don't have that currently. And so I hope that they heed his advice and definitely, get involved in the community more and get to those schools and really try to recruit some of the young African American men that live in these communities to be police officers in these same communities. He talked about the narrative that the media plays a huge part in creating. But I liked how he empathized with the fact that, the negative experiences that a lot of African American men face and that feeling of having a target on their back, like that's real. he said that you will see evil, and I appreciated him saying that. For me, it really validated what he was saying. That he acknowledged that. He acknowledged that there is some evil in the force. And that the feelings that we have, insecurities that we have, that they're valid. And so I appreciated that. How he was able to not only mention just again the number of officers that are doing the right things, but also acknowledging that our feelings and our fears are real. So again, it really gave validation to what he was saying. When he acknowledged that, and as he ended his time, the moderator asked him, if you had a magic wand, what three things would you change? Right? I thought it was a great question. So the first thing he mentioned was diversity in the department, which I've kind of touched on already. The next thing he mentioned was cultural diversity training. And earlier he had talked about how, there's not enough psychological testing that happens for police officers. You think about all the things they see, all the things they deal with, and there's not nearly enough testing to make sure that you're still fit to be an officer. And along with that, the cultural diversity training, he said he's had it one time in 20 years. Let that sit in, right? Let that sink in, rather. One time in 20 years. I think about my career and my job. I get more training on minuscule things about my career more than someone like an officer gets that kind of cultural diversity training, which is really important in dealing with the communities that they're serving. So I thought that was powerful. And the third thing he mentioned was that there should be one SOP across all the forces, right? One standard operating procedure. And I like that idea because it makes things clear, makes things easy, makes things simple. It's all defined. So I really appreciated his candor. I really appreciated him sharing his truth. I also really appreciated him, sharing about the fact that there are a lot of great officers out there. And that, again, not painting all of them with that broad brush that that we can tend to do from the far too many negative experiences that we've had with officers and the things that we've seen them do to African American men in an unjust manner. So, but again, I appreciate him sharing that. It was wonderful to hear from him, and definitely walked away enlightened and a little more educated about with their experience as officers. The next person that spoke was Mr. Aaron Dallas II. And this young man is involved in politics at a young age. And the moderator really asked him about, how can a young person be involved, in this movement, being involved in politics. And he talked about, the importance of marching and protesting. He talked about the difference between, having an effect on a national level and a local level, about how on a national level is a little bit more indirect, a local level is more direct, being able to get the boots, being able to volunteer in the community, get boots on the ground. He talked about just how this movement, how the young people, are leading it. They're marching, they're protesting, they're organizing these things, and it really felt good because I know growing up for me, we're taught to look to our elders and follow their lead and kind of let them guide us. So it's great to see this young leader with all this energy, and he spoke with such resoluteness about what they're doing. I mean, it was so impactful, and it really gave me comfort to know that this young man's going to be leading, myself and my kids in the future in this movement and just in general. So it just like that was really powerful, and he also had some great book recommendations that we'll share at the end, hopefully for you as well. One of the things that he also talked about was asked about was the difference between what he was able to do in as far as organizing and being impactful in the community in college versus as a professional now. And he talked about, there's a little bit of a challenge, of course, because in corporate America you can only do so much. But even in that, he's initiated a 21-day challenge and having open dialogue about what's happened. And so again, it just really spoke to just his clear vision on making sure that this opportunity is not wasted, that change can happen. He was then asked, how were young people feeling about what's going on right now, because you're in the streets and you're protesting, you're protesting, and marching. How are they feeling? And he used two terms or two words that aren't normally used together. He said hope and rage. And I thought that was incredibly powerful because, there's the hope that things are going to change with everything that's going on, that we can spark some change. And then there's a rage, of everything that's happened, kind of why we're here. And I loved how he juxtaposed the two words together and how they describe what's going on right now. And he also packaged it by using a James Baldwin quote, which I'll read so I don't butcher. And it says, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in rage almost all the time. And I'll read that again. To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in rage all the time. So I'll let that sink in. No need to comment on that. So again, it was a great opportunity to hear from this young man again, who's a future leader. And it was just, again, it's really encouraged me, inspired me a lot, made me feel like I'm not too old to make a difference, which felt good. The next gentleman that spoke was Mr. Jenny Jones, aka Jay Jones. And he talked about just financial literacy, the importance of retirement. He had this incredible presentation slideshow that just talked about this pyramid, of just a retirement and building your money. And at the bottom of that pyramid was cash. The next level was income. The third level was growth and income. The fourth level was just growth, and the last level was aggressive growth. And it was an impactful, simple presentation on how to make sure that to make sure that you are making good decisions in how you're managing your money. And I know that in our community, I've seen it from working in finance that often that we're not taught that we don't search that out, and retirement is something that's talked about again in our community. So it was great to hear that. There was a lot more he talked about, but he wrote a book. So I'll leave you to get some of the information out of that book he wrote, which again hopefully we'll be able to share at the end. It has all the information that he shared in the slideshow, as well as some great pointers about retirement. The next gentleman that shared was Dr. Kwame Atsina. He's a West African a young man who's in the Bay Area now, and his time and what he shared with us was also extremely powerful. He talked about just the tragedy of America, and when it comes to healthcare for African American people, has been race and discrimination. He referenced the Tuskegee experiment as well, which I'll talk about in a second. But it's just, he talked about how with COVID-19, after what he mentioned was our longest era of job growth, COVID-19 hit, and it revealed that we live in a house of cards, which I thought was a pretty good way to describe it. We look around the country and the world and what's happened with this virus and how it's affected a lot of people professionally and companies. We really do live in a house of cards. And so I liked how he talked about that. He talked about how COVID-19 has disproportionately affected African American community. A couple of reasons why he talked about was, one, in our community we have a lot of pre-existing health conditions, especially as black males. And also he talked about that we have a lot of multi-generational homes. So therefore, we're passing the virus on to each other at a more rapid pace. So I thought that was really insightful too. He talked about what the screenings, and because of the distrust that exists among African American males in the healthcare industry, is that we have to be our own advocate. We have to search out and know what screenings that we need to get at certain life stages. He talked about at age 18, talked about at age 40, at age 50, 60 and above, just the importance of getting certain screenings. And he shared a couple of websites with us, that again, hopefully at the end we'll share, that gives you, some guidance on what screenings you need at what stage of your life. So as an African American male, for me, it was great to hear that, because I know that sometimes I can feel like I'm okay, I can just work through it, I'll be fine, and that's not wise. So He referenced that also in regards to mental health. That same mindset and stigma of having to be tough really allows for African American males to suffer from mental health issues. And going back to the Tuskegee experiment, that a lot of that has been passed down because of that, and the distrust that stemmed from that. And so that was really powerful as well. But he said, nonetheless, we need to seek out that help if you need it, and not be too tough to admit you need some help mentally as well. We want to be healthy physically, spiritually, and mentally. So I really enjoyed what he shared. Again, it was very, very powerful. The next gentleman that shared was Tyrone Smith. And if you know Tyrone Smith, you know that he brought the energy. The room was not asleep by any means, but he still woke it up. And so it's a powerful speaker, a great man of faith, former professional football player. He was able to really, again, get everybody engaged. And he talked about a tough subject. He talked about the importance of accountability, and kind of spilling over with that tough guy mindset that Dr. Kwame Atsina talked about. We can have that as well in an area of accountability. And he said to set forth to challenge you as a man, and to set guidelines and have somebody to hold you accountable to that. And I thought that was awesome. He talked about the work-life balance and how important that is. Providing for the family versus family time. And he talked about writing out your schedule, doing a self-inventory, and sharing that with your accountability partner to make sure that you are having a good work-life balance. And that really struck me because I look at my schedule, I review it my own, I kind of have an idea what I need to do, but I don't run it by anybody. And I think it goes to that ingrained false narrative of being a tough guy that like I can handle this on my own. And so it was really powerful. And Tyrone really tried to hold us accountable about being accountable. So I really appreciated that. Talked also about being a mentor and making time to be a mentor, and that was impactful as well, because I know for me, I can look at, well, hey, in my home, I mentor my two children. That's kind of like my mentorship. But I can make time to mentor other people and other young black men who need it. And so it was really inspiring, him sharing that, and it's the impact that he's made. It speaks for itself. He also has a book that hopefully we'll be able to share with you as well. So he talks about his story, and he has a very powerful story about what shaped him and what's brought him to where he is today, and how he sees the world, and I think provides great insight also on the energy that he has that is so infectious. And our time was ended off just perfectly by Cousin Ed, aka Uncle Ed, and he began his time just by shedding tears. He cried. He cried because he said that as a community activist, which is what he is, he's been working for 50 plus years to see what we did this past Saturday. And when I say everybody was kind of stopped in their tracks, they did. I mean, it was just, there was a depth and a heaviness to the room, the Zoom call, as he mentioned that. And he shared that raw emotion of just gratefulness of what we were doing that day. And again, not that we needed any validation for what happened that day and what we were doing, but he definitely provided it for us when he started out that way. He talked about all the work he's done for all these years, again, to be able to see the fruits of his labor. In other words, on Saturday, was really impactful. So it was a great time. It was very uplifting. I walked away with so much information, and I know everybody else did there too. And it definitely inspired me to make sure I was there at the next one when we have it. So I can't wait for that to happen. It was organized in a great way by Ken Sellers with the help of Rashard Carter, who moderated and did a phenomenal job navigating through the six panelists and asking questions that really were poignant and allowed us to kind of get inside their mind. And also Derek Taylor, who helped organize and get some of the panelists on there. It was just, again, a wonderful time. I was so blessed and I was enriched. And I'm grateful to have been a part of it. So hopefully that was enough of a nugget. You got some out of it so that, even though you weren't able to spend the full 3+ hours listening to that Zoom call, that you got something out of what I've shared out of this recap. And also it's inspired you to make sure that you attend the next one. I can't wait for it again, as I mentioned. And I was grateful to be a part of this one. So with that, I'm all done. Jamone, and I'm out.